Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. Today, getting into the first nutrition book of 2021. I like that this channel will have a wide range of books. So, had a novel last time, getting into some science on this one. Who knows what's coming next? I don't even know. But a lot of sciencey type books will be on here, leaning kind of nutritional, leaning plant-based, leaning gut health, just my interests flowing into here. And I hope to be able to discuss some of these topics a little bit without having to be like, I'm going to do a video on fats and talk about fats, but to be able to have books like The Future of Nutrition from Colin Campbell come up and be able to discuss things along with them, because this was a really thought-provoking book. I am a big fan of his. One of the first documentaries that I watched as I kind of started changing things in my health and my nutrition was Forks Over Knives. And it's still, I think, just one of the classics. And what I like about it is that there's obviously tons of things that I agree with. There's also some points where I see things a little differently, would maybe want to ask some further questions on. And so it's not one of those where it's like, oh, this doctor has it. Every word he says is I bow down to it. Like, it's a really, really good perspective, and it really gets you going. And then it shows it's up to you. You know, you're forming these a little bit. You know, it's your body type and what you're leaning towards and what you're finding through your own personal experience. So I really liked this book because it added depth to an area that I think wasn't getting it maybe, where I think like someone like me, I don't necessarily need another book on veganism. Like, I'm good. But it seems that in the medical establishment, universities, sort of like academia, you need about twice as much information on plant-based as you would for an animal-based study for people to really champion it. And he has been ostracized since he started kind of deviating from the main sort of like industries, really, and going with studies that helped pharmaceutical or dairy industries. When he started going against it and saying, like, hey, we're finding other things here, that did not go over well, and he could have taken steps back, but he didn't, and that's why I love T. Colin Campbell. That's why the whole world loves him. And I just want to give a little preface on this man before we even get into his book. He not only, Forks Over Knives was probably his most popular mainstream outing, but the main thing that man is known for, and rightfully so, is the China study. Now, I have not read this book. I just picked it up. He has 3 books out, and this is the one of the 3 I have not read. The China study is the most comprehensive study on, like, various types of diets I think ever conducted. And the number is, it's north of 300,000. I want to say it's like 386,000 people studied over the course of years in various parts of the country of China, from rural to city to getting some new things and really seeing the trends in how people were changing, who lived longer, who had what diseases. And because it was so comprehensive, the data became irrefutable, to the point where industry leaders were coming at him saying, it's not fair to say that, increased fat or increased animal fat or increased animal protein could cause cancer, and the basis was just, well, we have this data here, let us know where we went wrong, and then we'll correct it. Couldn't be done. So that the ruling stands, and it's something that it's sad that it had to be this thorough. It's kind of like how going into the last 2020 election, that everyone is saying, for Biden to win, it couldn't be close. He would have to really win, and it's like, it shouldn't have to be that way, and that shouldn't have to be that way in this, but it is. And so he fights that fight. He goes overboard on his data, and that's why his studies continue to get referred to, and that's why the China study is far and away the most cited study I've ever seen in any of the books that I've read. Like, every single thing since 82 or whenever that came out always has reference to it, and rightfully so. His other book, his second book, so China Study being the first, second book, the one that I have read and loved, this was after watching Forks Over Knives, once I'd kind of gotten aware of his work. And he was a professor at Cornell for a long time, which is for our nutritional sciences, is pretty high up there. He had tenure, so he was able to kind of start doing some things, even though they were saying, like, hey, dairy industry doesn't like that, and they fund a lot of our stuff, could you not? He's like, I got tenure, I'm going to keep get into the truth here. So, always props for people that are doing that. But this book, Whole, probably in my top 3 plant-based nutrition books at all. And I will get to Future of Nutrition in a minute here. As I'm looking down at it, it's like, I haven't said a word about that. But it's important to know this because these books inform this one. And there's some of that argument where he's able to say, you know, I've this section of it I've gone in detail on. This is a new book. We're trying to get new information out there. So not that these are necessarily a precursor to that, but these 3 make quite a package. But Whole, real quick on it, really spoke to the evolution of plants, I would say, and how they have become so well balanced in their nutritional profiles. So looking at things like, for an example, easy one would be vitamin C, where people say, in the winter, I want to take vitamin C, reach for a vitamin C tablet. Got it. Now I have vitamin C. Or you could say that orange juice is high in vitamin C, grab some oranges, make some orange juice, and the other nutrients that come along with that aid the vitamin C, that there is that entourage effect, that there's a reason things are put with that. It's like when we have calcium in kale, but there's other minerals that go along with it that make them calcium easier to absorb. And so there's things that plants have evolved to maintain and have that are part of the overall package. And so that book, Whole, really goes into a lot of what this book dives into as well, kind of holism versus reductionist science. And it's an important way of looking at it, because I think in the Future of Nutrition, the main audience for this book, I believe, are people who are sort of already in science, maybe in academia, who need it spelled out crystal clear and at length, and with sources cited that I don't know how one could refute it. There's parts where I can see where maybe certain things were done in a biased way, but it's almost not biased. It's, you know, to say, well, yeah, he's been doing the Chinese, he's been doing all this plant-based stuff, it's biased. Like, it's based on evidence. So yeah, I can see where some would say, like, yeah, there's other sides to it, but and I have my own things on it, on being more into raw foods, that I see some things where his discussion of fats was a little simplistic for me. But the book was basically broke down into 3 parts, and it really, the first part was history, and it was a history that was really important to me. So not to get too deep on on me in a book review video here for you, but my mom, she died of cancer when I was young. I'm not gonna say that at 9 I snapped and was like, I'm going vegan. That was Monsanto. I don't know that stuff. And even later on, as I got into this stuff, it wasn't fueled by that. But then later on, as I learned more and more, I saw connections. So in the first part of this book, which the book is maybe, I think, 280 pages, 3 sections that are roughly equal, and then like afterwards, forwards and stuff like that. But really just on not the history of cancer, like the disease, but history of our understanding of it and approach and how we got there. So a lot of it kind of transpiring from 20s to 40s, I would say, of policy and trying to understand, is cancer a localized or a constitutional disease, where you can see as this, you know, he's going through the history saying, you know, this is kind of what was happening. Then this study came out, that shifted the argument. As we got here, this one succeeded, and then it took off, and you can really start to see, like, oh, that's why we go with surgery, radiation, and these sorts of things. People, it's not that plant-based science was nowhere to be found at that time. People were adamant about it and vocal, and finding clear data that we're seeing now too. You don't need 100 years of technology to get to the understanding that plants are helpful for the body, and some of these things that we're calling for upwards of 40% fat in those days, really just coming from animals. They're not getting almonds at the health food store like we're doing. Like it's really simple forms and almost all animal based. It's gonna be butter, dairy, and just meat. And so in these studies where in those areas we're saying, you know, lowering your fat can do this, and that being really refuted because it was essentially saying eat less meat, and cattle industries, everything have enough lobbying power, even back in the day when it wasn't so let's say, politicized like it is today, where back then it was really just that there were a few people who had big hammers to swing, and a lot of them were on the wrong side, in my opinion, and so things got swung more localized. Not to give spoilers here, but yeah, so he kind of gets into how we ended up where we're at on those treatments that they were exploring that weren't working, that said, well, we'll keep trying. Other ones are like, hey, what about plant-based? This proves work. That's radical. Well, let's try radiation. They tried injecting colloidal lead, 600 milligrams of it, into people, and just to see if that worked. And it was just like, this is medieval compared to less meat, more plants. And so it was really fascinating to see how we got there, so that not only for people in academia or medical professionals seeing it in language and from institutions that they respect, but for my own sense, so that it's not just these fucking, I'm just biased. Like, it happened. The line of thought was tweaked, and that has hurt humanity. And to be able to see how it happened was very informative as I move forward to more current parts of the book, I would say. The middle got a lot into things that I would say really would be great for people who are in academia or medical, where the first part I think is pretty universal for everyone. Second part, I will say, got a little dry. He's a very talented medical professional and doctor, and I think sometimes maybe that doesn't translate as fluidly. I think he's maybe like 80s or so, and there are parts in where all of a sudden I would start to worry, like, oh man, is this getting a little dry, a little older? And then all of a sudden, like, a line would just hit, and it's like, oh no, that man has prowess unlike anyone else. Like, still top notch in this field, but sometimes it would just drag on, and I'm like, I'm interested in this science enough where this one would make me a little more reluctant, whereas like whole, I don't remember having any instances of that where I was just like, this is incredible what plants do, wow. And so there's some of that where I think he needed to be relentless in it. I don't expect another book from him, frankly. I don't expect, or maybe not another one of this magnitude based on his pacing on these. It's usually like 7 years in between. I think this was like 2008. I think this was like 2013. And so wouldn't expect another one. It's kind of like with Tom Robbins. He's my favorite author of all time. He put out 8 novels, and then a short story collection, then a biography, and then like a kid's book, adult book thing. And I don't think another novel's coming. And at this point, I probably don't want one. I probably don't want a bad Tom Robbins dump. He has 8 pristine novels. So I think in Future of Nutrition, he was kind of pulling together any loose ends and knowing like how thick-headed some people in academia may be. It's like, refute this, honestly. And that's kind of how it was on some of it. It's heartbreaking to hear because I don't think anyone is confused to the point of thinking, well, I think the food industry's really got our back, though. I mean, PepsiCo, Nestle, they're looking out for us. So in this, you just kind of see in plain terms what's going awry. He also, and this is kind of where the third part gets into, has not only been involved in research in academia, but he's been involved in some of these big institutions. So, National Cancer Institution, all these big things that sort of, when they throw down a gauntlet per se, like, we say this is the amount of fat, like, people listen. And so he, having been involved in those, not only understands their weight, but then can see where they're getting awry. And seeing, in personal experiences, I was involved in this, they really told me to do this, they chopped on my interview, this happened, that man who handled all of it, 2 months later, big deal with pharmaceutical companies, and things where you see like, oh, direct connection, they were opposed to plant-based things, big money from cattle industry, yeah, they weren't going to let that study fly. And so you can just see how if an institution becomes corrupted at all, then everything is. And so he, I think, speaking to the fact of this potentially being his last book, went out on all the limbs, named names, pointed fingers, because it's the right thing to do. And he's not concerned about getting his funding or grants anymore. Saying, if this is led by a person who's deeply tied to this pharmaceutical company. Do we trust their stuff? And it's not conspiracy, weird stuff. It's just very clear cut in the medical thing. You know, some people are taking more money than others. And it gets really cut and dry of how just because a big statement comes from a powerful sounding institution with an acronym for a name, that's like, oh, that's the new gospel. Like, Coca-Cola has their own institution that just verifies their own things. Like, you'll see at the bottom, like, certified by the National Institution for Sugar, and, like, I forget the exact name of it, but if you look through, then it's just their own institution. So they vet themselves, and then they put this little stamp. It's like if a film put the little, like, olive branches, and, like, it won this award and this, but it was all, like, we created that award show. Like, but had the little flower with it, and then it's like, hey, that's an award-winning thing. Like, so there was some of that in there where he shows how self-regulating regulators aren't really good for anyone except for big industries. And so he covered a lot in it. I will say he didn't get so much onto your own personal health. So as I get through more books on nutrition, plant-based, whatever it may be, I like that now I have more of an arsenal to where if someone asks, like, hey, I'm looking for plant-based, what sort of path are you trying to go a little further down here? And it's like, well, it's that factory farming I'm trying to learn a lot about. It's like, okay, Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. That's a great book for that, where this is not something I'd recommend to someone who's trying to make, like, personal choices so much, but maybe solidifying their family's decisions. Like, if they're like, I need that big overarching, oh yeah, that's why we do not do that. You know, like, but in the day-to-day, like, tweaks you might make, things you might be feeling, like, there wasn't a lot in there. They're touching back onto what I said on fats, the small sort of disagreement I have with it is something I have with a lot of nutrition books, frankly. And he rectified one thing from Forks Over Knives that I didn't like. There was a really simplistic thing about fats, about, like, and it might have even been from, like, the Forks Over Knives, like, part 2, like, Engine 2 diet or something, where they, like, walked with, like, 3 couples through a couple months of their life, got them on the good plant-based, whole food plant-based diet, but which is what he really advocates for, and it's a very difficult thing to refute. But they were cleaning out their pantry in this snippet, and they had almonds in there, and she's like, well, I think she said, I'll keep the almonds. It's like, almonds? That handful of almonds, that's more calories than a whole salad this big or something. And I was like, okay, almonds though, like, the just good fats. And so I think the difficulty I have with it is twofold. It's that I think a lot of vegans or plant-based people go too low on fats. Not a keto guy, not pushing that by any means, but I just think it's something that becomes easily unbalanced. It happened with me, who I feel like I put probably more effort into it than a lot of folks, and so it took me a while to figure that out. So I try to relay that now, like, to sprinkle some hemp seeds on your salad, like, add some good fats in there. But the second point of what I'm discussing here is the old good fats, bad fats thing. I really think it has to do with being raw or not, and that's something that the conversation has never had that before, and we can't seem to get to a solution. It's not easy enough to say animal source is bad, plant-based source is good, and that's what he gets into in this book, and that's where his stance on fats is suspicious in general, of just leery, don't add a lot of them, where I think the right ones can be good. And he acknowledges that there can be good fats, but it's hard to fit like a broad category, like those are good, those are the bad. I think it's the long chain versus short chain fatty acid difference, and that's not something that got referenced in here, where he used something like olive oil or like flaxseed oil as a reference for a plant-based, also used things like nuts. Well, to the almonds in the pantry, are they glazed with maple syrup and roasted and then sprinkled with brown sugar and nothing left, or are they organic sprouted almonds? Like, one of those is really good, has the live oils in it. The other one has been heat treated, whether that's pasteurized and semi-heat treated or full-on high heat treated. Truly raw especially sprouted, organic nuts and seeds, or any other fats or oils or avocado that aren't high heated maintain their short chain fatty acids. When you high heat them, like an olive oil. Olive oil is just like if you juiced most like a non-fatty plant, like celery or watermelon or whatever. That's the liquid you get from it. With a fat, obviously, it's going to be more oily. At that time, fresh olives, juiced, fresh olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, just like what we get in most stores. That's good. My perspective is that's good. Once you start high heating it, those short chain fatty acids clump together and form long chain fatty acids. We have all different places for short chains to go. Go here, we take it in, our body knows just what to do with it. Long chain fatty acids, we don't have a spot for. Those bounce around and eventually just stick. That's where the old adage of the fat you eat is the fat you wear came from, but was rooted wrongly, I will say. I think it's the fat that you high heat is the fat you wear. That's my issue on the good fats, bad fats thing. And that's why I think avocado always comes up as such a good fat, because no one ever really heats it. And it's why I love seeing millennial, like if that's your one like fruit or vegetable you eat in a day, like that's a really good one to eat because you're not high heating and all that stuff. But yeah, I think he got really close in the fats discussion. But he touched on the raw thing in one aspect. So he had maybe a dozen like more like fruits, vegetables, and like beans, where he kind of rated their nutrition raw, boiled, or maybe fried or something where it was like way overdone. But and you could see like, yeah, kale, like crazy vitamins raw, like steamed, still some with it, and like all the raw is generally more. Some on the cooking a little bit higher. There is some plants do that in weird little ways. Not anything what overall raw is compared to overall cooked, but it was something where I was glad to see that mentioned in there. He even mentioned fasting, which was not something I expected. So in the very tail end, he mentions it, and it's challenging for me to see such powerful themes from leaders in the raw food movement, whatever you want to call it, that have been going back for decades and decades, and then seeing them missed in modern day, like more commercial plant-based things, I would say. So I was glad to see some of those more outlier, yet very important aspects of health referenced in here, even though it was a pretty narrow on the clinical, academia, institutional, why the landscape of plant-based nutrition is what it is. And so much of our information and our reassurance comes from these institutions. And so I think he recognized that no matter how many books he puts out, no matter how many documentaries and posts, a lot of those are going to the same people. Like I said, I don't need another vegan book. I'm there. But shifting the institutions, that's the big change. And so I think midway through the book, or early in the book, I loved it. Midway I was like, oh, this is getting boring. And then started to realize like, oh, this is actually really good. And by the end, it's like, this is a very, very good book. Very important. Probably one of the more impactful plant-based nutrition books that'll come out because of the target audience. I don't think you'll see as many people reading it at coffee shops or, out and about or whatever, but I do think this will have a big lasting impact, and over the course of the years, I think you'll hear it referenced more. Just like when the China study came out, I'll tell you right up now, it's not a book I'm like excited to read a ton, partially because I've heard it referenced so much in these two and other books that I know how that goes. There's not a big surprise ending here. Like, it's way better in this, but I am excited to just learn the ins and outs, and it's like the big plant-based one. How can you sidestep it? So yeah, it's funny. Midway through I was like, I might not even review this book. It's not going good. But then realized like, wow, and really sat with it more. And I think that's a really important book, and probably not going to be on my top 10 this year, I'll say, but Dr. T. Colin Campbell has done a mountain of good work for humanity. Like, the amount of cancer that he's reduced, heart disease reduced, like, that's saintly in my eyes. And I'm probably overstating it if people disagree with my views on plant-based, but from my perspective, this man does real good things. So Future of Nutrition, seal of approval. Check it out if you're down to get a little deeper into the clinical weeds, really want to get some rock solid foundation on why a whole food, plant-based diet, not I'll eat vegan junk food and then point fingers at people who eat meat. Like, nah, we're talking, basically, if you're going plant-based, do it like you were in the 80s. Do it like you're going to the produce department. And then maybe you'll find some other things, tahini and other things, but like all the fake meats, the fake foods, whether it's vegan or not, it's not good for you. So, stepping stones. They can be stepping stones, but ultimately, whole food, plant-based diet, that's a hard one to refute. Future of Nutrition, Colin Campbell. Check it out.